Hello, my name is Peyton Wilson. I'm recording this on Vimeo. And if you're anything like me, a sophomore political science major from Cincinnati, Ohio, I guess just that political science major part, and you sort of have a vast interest in race relations, but not just race relations as they have to do with today, but in general. Um, this is definitely the essay for you if that's the case. Um, want to start off by giving my own credibility towards this specific topic, as not only am I like a black man in America who attends the HBCU, one of the top HBCUs in the country, in Washington D.C. So I'm very like accustomed and around the political climate, and I get to see it in person. But even growing up, my experience was like that. I grew up in a predominantly black community called Lincoln Heights, which was pretty much surrounded around a bunch of white communities. It was practically smudged in there, but it was there before. In that experience, I was able to analyze and see some of the aspects that I think were really different, whether I was attending school or hanging out with friends or going on field trips. I was able to like leave my community and see like, oh, there's a big difference. Not just with like food security or the amount of infrastructure that they tend to put through our communities, but through also just like personal things like familial dichotomy, where like you see parents um, and their roles in your life and how different they can be. But I also want to talk about my analytical perspective on this, when I sort of did my research cohort in junior year. I was able to analyze the disparities as they relate to race, with drug usage and mental health. And I sort of want to bring this back around to the main topic by highlighting how I figured all these things are a reality, a day to day, of a lot of black children growing up. And looking at those things, you can really draw the connections between how this was affected today and what regulation, what systemic issues came about this or resulted in this throughout the past. So without further ado, I wanted to ask the main necessary question is, why is it important to address historical injustices under today's ethics? Before I begin, it's obviously a yes for me, but I wanted to sort of paint this in a way that was counter to the topics that we've already ran through as the black community. So I wanted to look at counterpoints. So getting in there, first I have some that revolve around reverse discrimination. Some like, is it discriminatory to give certain groups benefits or recognition based on ancestry or historical harm? Or isn't, if we primarily base race regulation on the minority, then don't the majority eventually become the discriminated? I definitely want to look into the fact that where this mindset comes from. It definitely implies the idea that there isn't a medium between the gap, like that equality for equality's sake is that we're already all treated as such. And that couldn't be more than wrong. As many of us know, there's been tons of regulation that's been in the past that have led to the dehousing of black Americans, that have led to the homelessness of black Americans, that have led to the overall poverty decrease of black Americans. So I definitely want to use that as like a context for a lot of people. Like, it's almost like if we're being beaten down, well, or that we're being beaten down, and that there has been an elevated population. So when that occurs, there's a gap in between that looks like almost that you're getting less and they're getting more, when in reality there's a means for equality, there's a means for equity. In a study published by Joyce A. Hughes, of the Michigan Journal, she definitely mentions this by sort of looking at white superiority, how comfortable you are in your already elevated status. The fact that a lot of these issues are void to you makes them completely irrelevant to you. So therefore, you think if someone's getting if someone's getting attention or getting treatment, then that's like perceived favoritism. When when in reality, it shouldn't be treated as neutral, or legitimate without careful scrutiny, essentially. Um, so moving forward, I definitely want to go to the next topic, which is revolving around the passage of time argument. I'm sure a lot of us have heard in these discussions that if our ancestors did something, how does that make us accountable? There's issues with affirmative action and almost reparations of a sort, where people sort of ask the question like, who is entitled to these things because of how distant they've been, and how how many records are lost and how many people are just don't know their heritage. Both sides, but like it goes down to a point where people are wondering, I didn't do anything, which is a valid point, but I didn't do anything, and so why am I sort of getting flack for this? But this sort of argument also implies the idea that that there isn't a persistence of racial disparities. As I said, I personally grew up in my community, and I was able to analyze these things from a very young age. And one thing I was certain about is that these things are still persistent. They're still affecting us. They're still normalized for us now. And that normalcy sort of allows a lot of people to believe like, oh, everybody's just doing their own thing now, when in reality, the people who have been discriminated against in the past are very much so still feeling these things today, not to a much more de jure degree, meaning like it's being acted on purpose, but more on a de facto degree. That's practically what most structural racism is today. I definitely want to look at the Thurgood Marshall Institute at LDF's research that sort of highlights the legacy of segregation, as many of the original institutions that were meant to kind of exclude Black people are still being obviously seen today. The fact that I know personally from my own experience that the community that I was raised in, all of our communities were sort of associated with each elementary school. There were 8 of them in total, 7 of them predominantly white, or 6 of them predominantly white, 1 of them predominantly Hispanic, and 1 of them predominantly Black. And the fact that that school had to be merged in because of segregation in the past, and my community still has like a bad negative rep to it, when it comes to like that sort of what's the word, sort of merging yourself into that community, then you sort of see it's definitely sort of like brings those sort of stereotypes to height. So I definitely still want to keep going and say that these structural limitations have definitely been persistent, and not on a widely structural level, but more on the more local forms. When you see them in that way, that's when they really become heightened, and that's why I feel like these people tend to ignore. The last topic that I definitely wanted to discuss was the idea of CRT. Now, this is a bit specific, but critical race theory is very important. It's definitely a topic that's been getting a lot of buzz recently in the political world. And really, when you hear about critical race theory, you hear a lot of counterpoints that bring up whole accountability and making children feel guilty, or making race relationships between children even worse, when in fact it's not at all the case. CRT is simply something that chooses to acknowledge racism for what it was and what it's been used to be most impactful. It's not just about implicit bias or having your own individual perspective on a demographic as whole. If that was the case, then, and there was no power behind it, then this wouldn't be a problem. But like, racism is definitely deeply embedded in our American culture in ways that a lot of us aren't even privy to. This perspective sort of suggests that the legacies of historical racism continue in present day, and it operates under educating individuals on the inequalities and inadequacies that we tend to see in fields such as employment and education. Affirmative action is one of the things that sort of highlights this. It's through the American Institutes for Research that the elimination of affirmative action has sort of led to a decline in Black and Latino enrollment. So, as I said from the past point, this isn't really something that is can be taken as like, oh, this is something that we're rectifying of the past, or this is something of the past. No, we're seeing actual spikes and in trots of information being influenced throughout history, like in our faces, in present. Now, granted, this was in 1990. Granted, this was like not 1995, but this was like taken a while ago. But it still speaks to the relevance of these things. And overall, instead of making students divisive, it instead like actually teaches them to strengthen their dialogue and making them more excelled in advancing in these topics, like not choosing to see them from like something that won't affect them personally, but like seeing it as a systemic issue. So overall, I definitely want to end this with a takeaway of recognizing the past isn't just behind us. Our systems are very much so still influenced by what we've experienced, or what our people have experienced through throughout American history, and there isn't really any sort of mindset that they can sort of take away. I think all of these perspectives that I sort of highlighted aren't all come from the exact same like basis of information. They view this as a thing behind us, and now we're in a better point. But progress doesn't just come from like ignoring the history. It comes from learning it and acknowledging it and, you know, actively working towards it. I think that starts with things like CRT, and I think it starts with acknowledging that this isn't just a passage of the time, and that reverse discrimination isn't real, like at least not on a structural basis. There's no way in any society that could be the case unless a big, huge shift has changed, and that hasn't been the case in our country. As long as we still see Black youth being at risk for the school to prison pipeline, or Black students still struggling to get in college, or Black mothers and fathers still falling under that exact same just archetype of parenting, then the system isn't really changed. It's just ignored, or it's just fake wokeness. Overall, no active production of reparative justice can change what's been happening unless it's been equal to it. That's the equality that we're looking for. So without further ado, I'll say thank you and